Welcome to Astrology Night here at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. It is the last Wednesday night of June, which means that we are looking at the astrology for the month of July 2018. And as many of you know and have just heard me say before we started recording for the third time, that this event has been going on for about 10 years now. And the YouTube channel that carries this goes out to about 45 to 75,000 people a month. There's been no real advertising on that. It's been word of mouth. And that's mostly because this has always been an extra thing in my life. As many of you know, I've been writing a daily horoscope column for 16 and a half years. I wrote my first column at the new moon in February of 2002. And for 16 and a half years, I've written about 1,100 words a day, 7 days a week. And those horoscopes are written for Tarot.com. Tarot.com distributes them through, you can read my horoscopes these days on AOL, on Yahoo.com, on Huffington Post, on LA Times, and many other places. Millions of people read them every day. Well, tonight's big announcement is that after 6.9 million words, I used Excel, and I actually calculated it out. After 6.9 million words over a decade and a half, I'm done. I have formally stopped writing daily horoscopes for each of the signs. I will continue writing the little overviews that many of you see either on my Facebook or Instagram pages. Those will still be included in the Tarot.com distribution, but they've put together, and I've helped them put together, an amazing dream team of a half a dozen astrologers who will each be writing a month of horoscopes for the next 6 months, and then they'll take it from there. So it'll be very exciting to see where that goes. If you've been reading my daily horoscopes on Tarot.com forever, well, you can still read daily horoscopes on Tarot.com, and they might have slightly different flavors and nuances, but they'll still be real astrology and quality work. So, having said that, the next question is, so what the hell am I going to do? Well, first of all, I'm going to begin seeing more clients. I haven't seen clients in years, many clients, because my writing schedule has been very strenuous, to say the least. By the way, in that period of 16 and a half years when I was writing dailies, Jeff and I also co-authored 8 full-length books for Barnes & Noble, and each of those books from the years 2006 to 2013, each of those books was another 150,000 words. So words are my thing, but temporarily done with that phase. So what am I going to be doing? Well, the bulk of what I'm going to be doing will be, was launched last night, and do people here know about Patreon? People know what Kickstarter is? So Patreon is like Kickstarter for artists and creative people who are doing things on a regular basis. Kickstarter is to fund one thing, and Patreon is like patrons. In the olden days, astrologers like Johannes Kepler had Emperor Rudolph as his patron, the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolph II. And the Renaissance astrologer in Florence, Marsilio Ficino, had as his patron Lorenzo Medici, the great wealthy Medici family. Well, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of emperors these days who are supporting us astrologers. The good news is that Patreon is a stable foundation online, patreon.com. Think patron with an E, like electronic patron, patreon.com. And at Patreon, just like public radio, rather than having commercials, you get to support what I'm doing directly, and I get to do it directly for you. And so it's kind of a very cool arrangement that's really redefining the role of the relationship between artists and people who purchase that art. We're taking the publisher, Barnes & Noble or whomever, out of the picture. And basically, like public radio, you can come in at whatever level you want. And I'm going to just spend just a brief moment here. This is important. This is the next phase of my life. You know, starting next month, it's like, what happened to that paycheck? So, but I'm going to work. I'm going to work harder than ever. It's just going to be different. So basically, the levels of membership in the Rick Levine Patreon, bless you, in the Rick Levine Patreon world will be starting as little as $1 a month. And basically, $1 a month, $12 a year. If you commit to paying $1 a month, you can opt out anytime. There's no contract here. But at $1 a month, you're basically saying, I like what you've been doing. I want you to keep doing it. And I understand that if I don't pay you $1 a month, I can still watch it. My free material is going to remain free. No one's going to be cut off because they don't want to up for $1 a month. However, if enough people up for $1 a month, well, we'll get 2 cameras, and good cameras rather than the things that we've been working with, and better microphones and a video editor, and we'll have more toys to play with and watch. I have things in mind, but that's what will happen with some of that money. So that's $1 a month. At $3 a month, instead of a lunar member, you become a solar member, and basically you get a mid-month update that will not be available for anyone else, only the people who are saying, yeah, I like it enough. You know, 36 bucks a year is not a big deal. I know it is to some people, but $3 a month, you get a mid-month update. That mid-month update will be done in a studio, not in front of a live audience. There'll be a lot more creative material. It'll be a lot more focused. It'll be a different flavor. It will not be available to anyone outside of the Patreon supporters. For more serious astrologers, at $10 a month, you can become a planetary member. Here, you're opting in for a bit more. I'm going to be doing a weekly 6-minute teaching. Just these are fast. I'm calling them cosmic quickies. And those will be available to you. If you miss one week, it doesn't matter. They'll go into a library. As a patron, you will have full access to the entire library at any time. There's more there, but that's enough for that. By the way, some of those cosmic quickies will be streamed live. As a supporter, you will know when that streaming will occur in advance if you want to attend those. At $35 a month, you become a student, in effect. And I'm calling that the galactic level. And for that, you will learn how to interpret charts. Whether you're an absolute beginner, a serious student, or even a professional, what this will be is a monthly, we'll use Zoom as a platform. And for those of you who don't know Zoom, it's very easy and we can walk you through it. But basically, it will be a monthly event where I will be doing chart interpretation with you. This will be a live event. There'll be actual interaction. The charts that we will use for the curriculum, like the second part of this evening, will be charts of participants. So if you become a galactic member, your chart goes into the hopper and they are drawn each month, and each month we'll look at a couple of charts, but we'll really dig into chart interpretation techniques. And so that's more of a class. And again, I'm giving you the bare bones of each. And then we jump to $100 a month. This is limited to 12 students. You will need to be interviewed before accepted here, and at 12 it's a cutoff. This will be a more involved, I'm calling it my version of Hogwarts, only better. This is Astrology Apprentices in Training, and we'll kind of detail more and more about this program as we go along. So that's my exciting news for the month. You know, go home and become a patron and tell your friends, and even if you're not interested in doing that, at least click here. At least click here on those of you watching on YouTube. Those of you who are here cannot click there, okay? But everybody else can click there and at least get on my mailing list. Make sure you get on my mailing list to stay abreast of what I'm going to be doing. I have some interesting things in mind, and being freed from writing 1,200 words, 1,150 words a day is going to give me an opportunity to begin shifting gears and paying back to the astrology community in a slightly different way than I've been doing up till now. So enough there. Thanks for your indulgence on that. Two quick events I want to mention, just a moment on each of them. They are both filling up. The first is the Brighton Bush Hot Springs event, which is on July 30th through August 2nd down at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in the old growth forest of Central Oregon, about 2 hours outside of Portland, an hour up in the hills outside of Salem. This is a 4-day workshop. I've been teaching at Brighton Bush now for about a dozen years. And this workshop will be putting astrology to work in your life, thinking cosmically while acting locally, hands-on work, a lot of work with our own charts, some experiential work. It's a magical, magical place. They have a few places left. We're maxed out. We max out. I have a limit of 28, and I think we're pushing 20 already. If you're interested, go to Brighton Bush, BREITENBUSH, Brighton Bush. The link is here. And check them out. Check it out. But if you're interested, do it quickly because they will fill up. The other event I have coming up is with Heaven and Earth Workshops. At heavenandearthworkshops.com, one word. This is my, I don't know, I think it's my 10th or 11th workshop with this group, a person who puts on astrology conferences around the world in England, Mexico, India, Bali. I've done pushing a dozen workshops with them over the years. This will be my 7th one in Bali. And it's an 8-day long retreat, and it's from October 6th through the 15th. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here other than it's magical. The information is all online, including our daily workshop schedule. We will have days off where we will do, beach events and temple events and waterfalls and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and all kinds of other things. The food is great. And if you're interested, you should act on that soon too, because that's going to fill up. That's in October. By the way, airfares right now from the States to Indonesia are low. I'm not exactly sure why. You can get round trip from, at least from Seattle to Bali, less than you can to Europe. So, we're looking, summertime rates are a bit higher everywhere, but we're looking at somewhere around $800 airfare. And everything is included in this package. You get picked up at the airport. It's room and board. 2 meals a day are covered. There's a restaurant on the retreat facility. The retreat facility is outside, about 20 minutes, half hour outside of Ubud, which is the cultural capital of Bali. And the retreat center has been built by my astrologer friend, Evelyn Roberts, who's the proprietor owner of Heaven and Earth Workshops. And it's a magical place. The teaching where we teach, I've taught there, is a large open space that has jungle on all sides open. It's pretty darn magical. One of the things that we do there is we map out a chart that's the entire size of the room, and a lot of the work that we do is work inside our own charts. It's pretty fun. It's pretty amazing. So enough there. And as always, thank you for your indulgence. And as always, if you don't like this part of my talks, please don't comment on my YouTube channel. Just shut up or go somewhere else. I'm so tired of getting people saying, God, I watch your YouTube and it takes 10 minutes for you to even talk about the month. And I'm thinking, you don't have to watch it. You can always click ahead. But people don't. People don't. All right, so I want to start off tonight talking about this month with a personal story separate from what I call my big announcement. Maybe it's bigger for me than it is for all of you, but this is my show, so to speak. But I want to start off with a little bit of a personal story, because this is an extraordinary period of time we're in. I think last month I said that last month stood out because there was a lot of noise, but not a lot of major boom, well, that changes. In July, there's large currents that are being stirred up again. We have 2 eclipses in July. We have Mars retrograde all month. We have a bunch of other stuff that's kicking. There's not a lot of outer planet aspects to outer planets, but there's major waves of change that the waves are waving differently now. The month is kicked off. No, actually, that's not completely true. Because we're recording this on June 27th, and tonight there is a full moon, and I have to begin talking about July, talking about the June full moon on the night of the 27th or the early morning of the 28th, depending upon where you are on the planet. If you're on the east coast of the United States, this doesn't occur until the morning of the 28th. Time zone difference. But I want to look at the chart of now, and we're coming into the full moon here, and in some ways, this really portrays the meat of what's going on, because I woke up today with a whole list of things to do, and I got somewhere around to 3 out of 15, and that's where I stopped. Now, I don't know if any of you have had this happen in the last day or two, but there's several events that are coming to a culmination right about now that all add to this kind of a process. And let me just tell you a little bit about mine, because obviously I'm at this transition point where as of July 1st, my horoscopes are no longer being distributed. I've written up through the end of June already, but these last few days there have been a lot of shuffling and getting things together and just wrapping my head around, getting the new writers and helping that all, flow correctly, and also trying to launch the Patreon page, and to get the YouTube channel together and to start putting my mailing list together. It's a big change for me, what I do hour by hour, day by day. So tonight's forecast this evening was an important one in my mind, and I had some pieces that I really wanted to do and bring and use, and woke up this morning and went through my astrology night day preparation, which I do every month, and that is I plug in things to make sure batteries are charged and everything, and the first thing I realized is I couldn't find my video camera. And I just went, I'll do everything else and think about where it is. And by noon I'm still looking, and at 2 o'clock my apartment there's nothing left unturned. And by 4 o'clock nothing is left unturned for the second time around. So it was like, boom. Now it hasn't turned up. If any of you are horary astrologers, consider this the question. Horary astrology is that branch of astrology where you ask questions like, where is my camera? I have no reason to believe it's been stolen. I have no reason to believe I left it on a park bench somewhere. It's somewhere. And I kept walking around my apartment thinking it's on that table right there. I'm just not seeing it. So it was one of those, totally frustrating. So finally, I realized, well, I got to go buy a new camera or something. And I said, well, I could use my DSLR, but it has a couple problems. Number one, it only has a 28-minute limit because of a whole tariff thing. Are you allowed to say the word tariffs without starting a war right now? But cameras are sold at a less of a taxable rate importing than video cameras, and the way they determine whether a device is a video camera or not is whether or not it can record more than 30 minutes of video. So what that means is that at about 28 minutes or so, I'm going to have to stop, turn that camera off, turn it back on, and start recording. Now, I've never used this camera to record this length of video, so we'll see what happens. So that was one thing. All right, then, so I'm going to test it at home, and I turn it on, and I realize, oh shit, the battery's drained. Well, that's no problem. I have 2 other batteries. I do a lot of photography, and I put the second battery in, and it was drained. And I put the third battery in, and it was drained. So I have 2 chargers. I plugged 2 of the batteries into chargers and let them go for about 3 hours or so, because I started this process earlier, like around noon, thinking I might have to use this camera. And at about 3 o'clock, the blinking lights that say that the battery was charging had stopped blinking. I thought, cool. And I went and put the first battery in, and it was still dead. And now I'm going, okay, the gods are playing with me. And I did that with the second battery. And it turns out that I have 2 chargers, each with different power cords. I swapped the power cords, charged them again, it was okay. There's no reason why that should be like that, but I don't know. So this is where my afternoon kind of went. And then for those of you who got here at the time we were supposed to begin, you know that I do a redundant recording of a digital recorder that's in my pocket, which is separate from the wireless recorder, which is going to the camera. And my redundant digital recorder uses a microphone that has its own battery, and that battery was dead too. So thank you for running out to Ben Franklin and getting me the additional battery. We seem to be recording on all fronts now. Now, there were other things too, but that's enough for now. I'm telling you this story not to whine. I'm telling you this story, oh, no, there is one other piece of it, and that is I got here early because I knew I'd have some different setup, and I realized I left my tripod home. Now, I only live 3 minutes from here, so it was no big deal. I just laughed at myself because I remember leaning the tripod against the door, and on my way out, I moved the tripod and walked right past it. So here's the deal. There are at least 3 things which are piling up into that kind of a scenario. I'm not saying that all of you or any of you have had that same energy, but there is a sense of things out there slowing down, forward progress taking a bit longer than we thought it would take, bumping into obstacles of one sort or another that are not necessarily to make it so we can't do something, but they're there to make us realize what it was we didn't do and to maybe do something better. And what I'm speaking about here in particular are what the ancients called the 2 malefics. In ancient astrology, Jupiter and Venus were the benefics and Saturn and Mars were the malefics. Now, we think of them as good planets and bad planets, and I sometimes refer to Venus and Jupiter as the good guys, well, good guys and girl, or woman, and Mars and Saturn as the bad guys, you know, the nasties of the planets. The fact of the matter is that the benefics aren't good, they're just easier to use and work with. And the malefics aren't bad, they're just tougher to integrate. You know, if you do a dive in Olympic competition, you get 2 sets of numbers. One is how well you executed the dive. One is how well you executed the dive, and the other is how difficult the dive was. So the deal is that if you do a swan dive and do it amazingly well, you may get 10 points out of 10 points for doing it beautifully. But if you do a triple twist backwards, I don't even know what you call these damn things, and it's an incredibly difficult dive, you might only get 7 points for execution, but you might get 10 points for level of difficulty. Whereas the swan dive might only have like 5 points for level of difficulty. So the deal is that it's really easy to perform with Venus and Jupiter transits and look graceful. With Saturn and Mars transits, it's like the level of difficulty is higher. But they're not bad planets, they just take more finesse, practice, and skill to do them well, but when you do them well, it's weller than if you do an easy one well. So here's what Saturn and Mars are doing and why many of us have bumped into various levels of stuff, not only today, last few days, last week, but will for the next month. Oh, no. Okay, so let's take Mars first, and I'm going to talk about it just briefly, and then we'll talk about Saturn, and then we'll cycle back around and dig into the Mars thing a bit more, because the Saturn thing is really about just this full moon. It's the beginning, it's the end of June and the beginning of July when the Saturn thing is cooking. The Mars thing is that, like Mercury and Venus and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, like all the real planets, Mars goes retrograde when it gets closest to Earth. So Mars turned retrograde just last week, just the other day. Does anybody have the date? Yesterday. Oh yeah, here's, okay, wait a minute. Here it is. All right, so Mars turned retrograde on June 26th, and it will turn direct on August 27th. I want to come back to this in a few minutes when we're digging deeper into the charts. I'm just trying to give you the overview here. Typically, when a planet turns direct or retrograde, it's still moving the same speed as it always moves. It's just from Earth's point of view, it looks like it's changed direction. And those few days around the retrograde turn or around the direct turn at the end, those are usually the trickiest days to navigate. So we are all in the midst of this Mars stationary retrograde. When Mercury turns retrograde, Mercury moves fast and it turns retrograde, and its holding still lasts for a few hours, a day and a half. Mars, however, when it turns direct or retrograde, the turning around point lasts several days because it's moving slower, and therefore it takes its time in stopping, like a pendulum going back and forth. Mercury is like this, and Mars and planets outward move slower, so they take longer to hang out at the retrograde or direct station. The word station is the point at which we're at, the place at where, the point at which it returns. Whatever. It's the point in the chart at which the planet stops to turn either retrograde or direct. Okay, so Mars right now today is station. Technically, it's stationary retrograde. It's already technically turned retrograde, but if you were to look at it up in the sky against the stars where you could see it after sunset, then you were to look up and see it, it would not look any place, it would not have moved over the last few days, nor will it move for the next few days. Mars is normally the planet of movement. It's the planet of going fast and of drive and of assertion. So Mars doesn't like it when he's stopped in his tracks. So that's one of the pieces going on right now. We're all dealing with the beginning of this 9-week period of Mars retrograde. You with me? Like I said, we'll come back to it in a minute. The second piece is not as long-lasting, but it's more powerful today. It would be powerful by itself, but piled on top of the Mars thing, it becomes like a double, no, a triple whammy. And the other piece of this involves this. We're coming into a full moon, and the full moon is any time when the moon is opposite the sun. Duh, that's what a full moon is. This particular full moon, the moon moved into Capricorn. We have Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn, incidentally, in Capricorn is also retrograding, backing up toward the last degree of Sagittarius. But tonight, tomorrow morning, if you're in, depends again where you are on the planet, but the night of June 27th and early into June 28th, the moon will line up with Saturn. Once a month, once a moon, when the moon lines up with Saturn, it's like our emotions, our feelings of being part of it all. The moon, the mother, the nurturing, the matrix of feeling belonging with the family, home, tribe, community, nation. The moon is that being safe within the womb. The moon, when it lines up with Saturn, it's like the nurturing, safe, mothering energy hits the disciplined, hard-ass father, Saturn, that says, not on your life, or you're in trouble. And so the moon's conjunction with Saturn is often a period of time where we can feel alone or isolated or separate, where something's not working out. And often there's nothing bad that happens here. Often it's just a matter of pulling in and saying, this is what I got to do and I'm going to do it. And you can feel really good about what it is that you do. Or one month that moon may pass over Saturn at 4 in the morning, and you're deep asleep when it happens, because lunar transits typically only last for a few hours or so. I mean, you can feel them coming. But this moon conjunct Saturn is the second piece of this puzzle. The third piece of the puzzle is that once a year, the sun, let me do this again, twice a year, the sun lines up with each of the real planets in the sky. When I say the real planets, I mean the Mercury, Venus, Mars, not, So the sun, because the Earth is going around the sun, it looks like the sun is moving around the zodiac. And as such, when the sun lines up on the same side of the Earth as the other planet, that's a conjunction. So that if from Earth's point of view, here we have the moon lined up with Saturn, if we draw a line to the moon and keep going, we get up to Saturn. That's a conjunction. But it's a line between Saturn, the moon in the middle, and then us on Earth. The other kind of lineup happens when the Earth is in the middle. And here we have the Earth, us, in the middle here, with the sun lined up with the moon. Well, that happens every full moon, because the full moon is really the Earth in the center between this tug of war of the solar and lunar energies. However, because Saturn is in this picture, we have the once a year opposition of the sun to Saturn. And this is an event all to itself, because when the sun opposes Saturn, it's like we are in the middle, and our willpower, the radiance, the awareness of our soul, the sun, in this case, nurturing, warm, caring Cancer, is opposite Saturn in aspiring, ambitious, hardworking, stern taskmaster, karma now Saturn. And so here we are in the middle between these, and we feel all the things that we should have done and we didn't, or we feel all the things that we need to do and we haven't gotten around to doing, or we may feel great about all the things we've done and that things are in line. Saturn is not bad. It's just, it just reminds you of what you haven't done if you haven't done it, and most of us humans, in most cases, haven't done all that we need to do. It's part of being human. So this full moon is incredibly important, and again, the three things are Mars retrograde, the moon lining up with Saturn, and the sun opposing Saturn, and the full moon all at once. So that's what's going on today, and I love it when I can blame the stars on my stupidity, but I accept whatever happened today was all mine. All right, so that being said, and I think that even though we're here to talk about July, the thing is that Mars's role in July is incredibly important. Mars, unlike all the other planets, has the singular, most peculiar retrograde cycle. In fact, it was the downfall of the logic of Pythagoras, because in order to make the sun be in the center, the amount of calculations and jumping through hoops to make Mars do what it's supposed to do mathematically was really nuts. And it was the great mathematical astrological genius Johannes Kepler in the early 1600s, who, by taking the very accurate observations of Tycho Brahe, who was a Danish astronomer that gave Kepler the observations, Kepler pored over these observations until he came up with the answer to the conundrum of what the fuck's going on? How does Mars's retrograde cycle really work? You see, because Mars, the cycle of Mars is roughly 2 years. It's actually 686 days, 687 days, which means that it's just a little under 2 years of Earth. Earth goes around once, I'm sorry, Mars goes around once, and Earth almost goes around the sun twice. When the Earth comes between Mars and the sun, that's when it looks like Mars goes backwards. But the weird thing is that Mars travels like an arrow. And remember, oh, I can do this. So Mars, whoop, come on, there we go. So Mars is actually, the symbol of Mars is the seed of potential directed. And Mars is actually, it's like about piercing, it's moving into new territory. It's thrusting. In sex, it's the act of penetration. It's not only that in sex, but in all modalities, when something pushes into something else, whether someone's in your face, telling you what you should or shouldn't do, that's Mars, the warrior planet, pushing boundaries from where it was to where it's going. Mars has direction. Mars is very much like protein. My friend Bruce Lipton talks about how proteins, like magnets, are bipolar. That in proteins, there's a side of a protein that likes water, and there's a side that doesn't. Hypophilic what did you fear? Fear something. Hydrophobic and hydrophilic. Thank you, Tyler. All right, but Mars is, the planet Mars is iron. It's rusted iron, which is really iron that's burned slowly. Mars is fire. It's anger. It's red. It's the hemoglobin in our blood cells that make us red, that make it red. And the whole idea of Mars is that it is magnetic. It is bipolar, like protein. It's going somewhere. It has directionality. So here's the deal. Mars moves really fast. It whizzes through a sign in about 6 weeks. It whizzes through about 11 signs at about 6 weeks each until Earth. Okay, so here we have the sun. Here we have Mars going around the sun. And here in between on Earth, we have Earth going around the sun. When Earth gets closer to Mars and starts coming between Mars and the sun, something very weird happens, because Earth and Mars are kind of moving, not at the same speed, but Earth is moving faster. But all of a sudden, as Mars slows down, Mars actually spends about 9 weeks retrograde, but it spends about 5 months, 5 to 7 months in one sign. So in astrology, the faster moving the planet, the lighter weight the transit is. When you have Pluto, which takes 250 years to go around once, when Pluto moves through a point in your chart that's sensitive, it can stay there for weeks, for months, for years. And it makes a different level of heaviness of having to deal with stuff than when Mercury comes whizzing through and just affects it for a day or two. So when a planet goes retrograde, it's very important because it holds that position in the sky. And so what I want you to imagine for a moment is a bow and arrow. There's a wonderful book, I can't think of the author's name, called Zen and the Art of Archery. Does anybody know it? It's a classic book about Zen. And the concept is, and in the Zen practice, archery is often used as a form of meditation, because the concept is this: the arrow will never hit the target until you let it go. Now this sounds stupid and go, yeah, of course. But the whole concept of Zen is letting it go. And so the way we let the arrow go with the greatest direction is we add tension to it to give it direction and speed. How do we do that? Go ahead, say it. Pulling back on the bow. So the further we pull back on the bow, the faster that arrow will go when it releases, the straighter and truer its aim will be. You with me here? So once you let it go, it actually, at the moment you let it go, it's not moving very fast. And it actually is not moving at top speed until it's well out of the reach of the bow. It's actually, as you let it go, it's accelerating. And then it finds its speed and it continues at that speed, and then it begins to slow down. So this is analogous to how Mars moves in the sky and how it works in our lives individually. When Mars is retrograde, it's not that it's bad. It's just we ain't going to let it go because we're pulling back on the bow. Got it? That's what's happening. It's different from all the other retrogrades because when we pull back on that bow, we're pulling back on it for a couple of months. And then when we release it, it still releases rather slowly. So Mars, that normally spends 6 weeks in each sign, I did a little spreadsheet on this because I was fascinated by I kind of wanted to make sure I had the numbers right in my brain. I don't know, where else would you have numbers right? In my toe. I don't know, whatever.
You're right.
So basically, Mars is spending approximately approximately 6 weeks in each sign. 5, 6, 7 weeks, it varies. 6, 6.7, 6.7. But then when it gets around the retrograde, what happens is that it slows down and it spends upwards to 8, 9, let's see, I gotta add these up. It's actually Mars, because Mars is changing signs. Mars, during this retrograde, will be in Capricorn for 12 weeks, and then 5 months in Aquarius. So that's about 8 months altogether in one area of the sky, because it moves so slowly while it's slowing down. And then once we release it, it still moves slowly until it gains enough speed. So what does this mean practically for us, and why is this important for this month ahead? And it's this, that any of you who know your chart, one of the key things to decide or to figure out, and I'm going to actually move this forward to July 1st now so we can actually be on July 1st. And I'm going to take the chart there, and we're going to just look at Mars here. So Mars is at 9 degrees of Aquarius. And actually, on July 1st, Mars is at 9 degrees and 3 minutes of Aquarius. You don't have to remember the minutes. I'm just making a point here that when Mars turned retrograde on the 26th, it was at 9 degrees and 13 minutes. So in that week, it's only moved like 10 minutes of arc. It's barely moving. It will crawl along backwards for days until it gains a little bit of speed moving backward. But then when it turns direct on August 27th, it will have backed into Capricorn again, but it will be back in Capricorn for a couple of weeks before it moves back into Aquarius for another period of time. What this means is that anyone who has a planet in their natal chart between about 27, 28 degrees of Capricorn, which is where Mars retrogrades back to in late August. Anyone who has a planet between 27, 28 degrees of Capricorn to about 9 degrees of Aquarius, those points will be joined by Mars once going ahead, once going backwards, and once going forward, and depending upon where it is, it can be over a period of months. So it basically takes just that whoosh of energy, and it really puts some power to it. Now, we can get crazy because we want it to move along, or we can work with it and turn what is one single, fling of an arrow, into much more powerful weaponry. I hate to use war images, but it is Mars, the god of war. Also, if you have any planets at the early degrees of any fixed signs, Aquarius being a fixed sign, but any of the fixed signs, Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, or Scorpio, then Mars is going to either conjunct, square, or oppose those planets, which again, how those planets work in your chart will become more important. Now, on the other side of it is that if you have a planet at, let's say, early degrees 0 to 9 degrees of Libra, an air sign, or Gemini, an air sign, this Mars will retrograde harmonizing, trine to those points. So how Mars impacts your chart it can be very different, and one of the things we would look is where is 9 degrees, where is 27 degrees of Capricorn to 9 degrees of Aquarius, where does that fall in your natal chart, and how do you work with those energies? Now, forgetting for a moment the individual aspect of it, culturally, what happens is this. Mars is the planet of assertion, which can become unhealthy and become anger. If anger isn't expressed, and anger can be very appropriate in the right situations, anger is absolutely appropriate. But if you don't express anger, then it can turn cold and it can become resentment. What happens when a planet gets louder than it normally is, I've talked about this many times from this stage, when Mercury is retrograde, it's louder, and when we get louder in our brain, what happens is it shuts down. It's like giving an adrenaline-based pharmaceutical to a hyperactive child or anyone. It basically makes them more hyperactive, and then poof, it goes away. It goes inward, downward. That's what retrograde planets tend to do. And Mars retrograde often becomes, I'm so furious, I'm so angry that I can't even. Anyone ever felt that way? All right. Well, get used to it. The thing, though, is that it's really important while Mars is retrograde to not let our anger get buried, to not let it go away, to not let it disappear, because there is an appropriate expression of anger. What happens with any planet, with any energy, this is psychoanalysis, Freudian, Jungian, Reichian, Fromian, whoever is your favorite of the depth psychologists, an emotion that's not expressed, that becomes suppressed, meaning that we don't express it consciously, or if it becomes repressed, meaning that we don't express it and we don't believe we have it unconsciously. You can't know that you're repressing something, you know. If you know that you're not repressing it, you're suppressing it. Okay, so an emotion that's suppressed or repressed basically appears in projection form. When you walk into a situation and you see someone and that person has their shoes untied, you go, that is stupid, I hate that, you're a slob. What you're really doing is you're hating the fact that you never tie your shoes. I mean, I'm caricaturizing it. But we take the things that we have trouble expressing or acknowledging, we project them, and whenever something out there becomes imbalanced, it's likely to be originating from a projection, including war. When a planet gets closer to Earth, that energy of the planet heats up and it's harder for it to express. When Mars heats up, the heat heats up. So what happens when Mars turns retrograde is that as a species, as a planet, we get angrier. And it's not that every war that's ever been fought was started on a Mars retrograde, nor is it that every Mars retrograde starts a war, but usually you can track back, and I'll do this maybe next month because Mars will still be retrograde, and give you a sense of the history of what has been associated. Remember, Mars retrogrades for a couple of months every other year. But it's interesting, the things that have been brought to the edge, whether it turned into war or not, that occur when Mars is retrograde. So the thing with Mars is that it's really important to express it in a healthy manner rather than having it get the best of us. Now, I can't go here without going here. And I'm going to say right now, just again to everyone in YouTube land, I will delete any posts that are political that come onto my YouTube page. This is not a political forum. It's my forum to teach astrology. And if your politics differ, well, differ it somewhere else or discuss it on a political forum. It's not for here. And yes, I do have politics and I do have a bias, and I am very proud of my bias. You're welcome to yours. It's just, I have to say this because every time I say anything about what's going on, my comments on the YouTube channel just explode, you know, and yes, I've even had Russians that I have identified as Russians that were absolutely trolling, and that's not, I recorded it. I mean, I have, you know, I saved verification. What I need to say is this. We're talking about Mars retrograde. Donald Trump was born with Mars on his ascendant. He has a Leo rising. As you may know, Trump is a Gemini sun with his sun lined up with Uranus, and Uranus is crazy, and I don't mean that I don't mean that in a bad way. Uranus is wild, uncontrollable. It's genius. It's erratic. Uranus it's Prometheus in a way. It's stealing the fire from the gods and bringing that technology to us. Uranus is futuristic. My favorite Uranian character in modern literature or movies is the professor in Back to the Future. He's an absolutely Uranian guy. I mean, is he nuts or is he brilliant? It doesn't matter. He's what he is. Donald Trump has Uranus conjunct the sun. It's not an easy position to manage in a natal chart. I'll tell you someone else who has Uranus conjunct the sun, very different chart, but Ram Dass, you know, who's also out of the box, you know, was one of the 3 psychologists along with Tim Leary who were expelled from Harvard for using hallucinogenics, LSD, in psychology experiments in the early 60s. And Dr. Richard Alpert, tenured Harvard professor in psychology, changed his name to Ram Dass and is still teaching awesome things. But Ram Dass has the sun lined up with Uranus. I'm just using that as an example. Trump has his sun lined up with Uranus, but Trump was born on a full moon that at the time of his birth was being eclipsed. So Trump was born at a full moon eclipse, which has its own level of instability with Uranus there. That sets the tone. There are other things I don't want to go deep into his chart. In my weeklies that I will be doing online, we will be looking at charts of famous people and deconstructing them, but not for here tonight. What I want to mention, though, is that Trump has Leo rising. I mean, that's not that every Leo is a narcissist, and not that every narcissist is a Leo, but I imagine there's a high correlate. No. Leo is the sun. It's the center of the universe. And with Leo rising and Mars, the fiery, angry, red, boisterous, bragging warrior planet rising, that's part of what we get. There's obviously more there, you know, there's always more than meets the eye. But I'm only mentioning this because when a planet is moving through the sky, it also impacts that planet in our own chart. And so while we all have our own things going on, Mars retrograde will likely contribute to Trump's energy of not being able to express his anger, which he normally seems to be able to express okay. So, and I don't know whether that's a good thing, and I'm not even here to judge that. I'm just here to point out the astrology of one particular piece of retrograde Mars often heats things up. Contentious energy, combative, conflictive. Remember, Mars is steel. It's iron and steel. Mars is about the clashing of one boundary against another. And during this Mars retrograde, we have a particular thing that stands out that is very significant. And although the three occurrences of this very significant event happened on May 16th, on August 1st, and September 8th. The May 16th and August 1st are close enough to now that it's still going to flavor all of July. And what I'm speaking about here is, I'm going to run this back to May 16th here, just very, very quickly. Whoops, there we go. All right, so what I want you to look at here is Mars. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go displayed points and go down here to temporary. And we're going to take everything out. Well, let's leave in Mars and Uranus and the sun, just from a standpoint of we can see what time of year it is, and there we go, and there we go. All right, so this is a chart for May 18th. I've taken everything out except for Saturn, except for Mars and Uranus and the sun. That Mars just plunked into, let's back this up even a day. So there's Mars in Capricorn on May 14th, and within a couple of days, Uranus moves into Taurus on May 15th, followed by Mars on May 16th. When Mars and Uranus meet up in the sky, there's, if I have a client who has a Mars-Uranus conjunction or a Mars-Uranus square or a Mars-Uranus opposition in their chart, I will tell that person never carry matches and dynamite in the same pocket. Dynamite doesn't light with matches, does it? Never carry firecrackers and matches in the same pocket, because there's something about the Mars. Remember, Uranus is that instantaneous, it's lightning striking. You can't control it. It's other than normal. If there's tension there, you don't know when it's going to happen, but all of a sudden, and don't jump out of your seat. I told you not to jump out of your seat.
And I have that in my chart.
All right. So there's a high-strung energy, because when Mars and Uranus get together, you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know how it's going to express. So when Mars squares Uranus, the energy is unpredictable. And I love this piece of astrology where here's an aspect that we're trying to predict what happens during this aspect. Oh, I can predict that. It's unpredictable. What happens with Mars-Uranus is, it's like lightning. You know that it could happen any minute, but you don't know when and you don't know where. So in mid-May, we had Uranus squaring, Mars squaring Uranus. And I'm going to move this ahead a day at a time. And we're going to get up to, there's Mars at 9 degrees. Right about now, there Mars S stationary, there Mars goes direct. Pay no attention to the green line, it doesn't impact what we're talking about right here. Then as Mars continues to retrograde back, it will retrograde by the end of the month back into an exact square with Uranus. Can you see that? Right there on August 1st. But during that period of time, the sun, having moved into Leo, is also involved in that what's called a T-square, where the sun is opposite Mars and square Uranus. Mars is opposite the sun and square Uranus. Uranus is square the sun-Mars opposition. Got it? It's like a tinderbox. So we have Mars retrograding all through August. The energy's building. We're getting more pissed. I don't care what your political position is. I don't care whether you're sitting on the Supreme Court or you want to do something nasty to the idiots who are doing things nasty. I don't care what position you hold individually. And again, I have my positions and I will not leave them out of this talk. The fact of the matter is, that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care what side of what fence you're on right now. Whatever side of whatever fence you're on right now, this is going to make you become more extreme and feeling like you're more at odds with what's going on and less in control, and something's got to happen and nothing's going to happen. Why? Because Mars is retrograde. And when that anger goes in and it turns around, it comes out as projection, unconscious actions. Now, let's just take this a little bit further, because that Mars continues to retrograde. It retrogrades back into Capricorn mid-August. It then turns direct the end of August. It moves out of Capricorn back into Aquarius around September 10th, 11th, 12th. And as it does is it moves back into that same exact square that is exact on September 18th for the third and final time. This is the takeaway from this Mars retrograde, because Mars is not just retrograde during this period of time. Mars is squaring Uranus 1, 2, 3 times, May 16th, August 1st, and September 18th. And in between those periods of time, things will happen that will aspect both of those planets, but those are the defining pieces around this that have to do with how are we going to move our, how are we going to release the tension that's been built up. Okay, so that's enough on Mars for a moment, and we're now going to come back through and run through the month and see how this ties into some of the other things, including the 2 eclipses that we have in July. All right. So let's go back first and add back in the regular planets. There they are. And let's go back to now, which is July 1, 7-1, and there. And now let's get that crib sheet out that has the day by days. All right, so here we are now back on July 1st. I'm going to breeze through a bunch of these things quickly. My purpose here on these month overviews is, rather than filling your brain with 100 things that are going to happen every hour of every day, I try to filter out some of the things that are more important that we can actually work with, that we can actually use in our lives, even though our days may become overwhelming or wonderfully good or bad on any one day. These background things kind of act as anchors that stay with us through the month. So we start the month off. One of the first things that happens is that Chiron, which has moved into Aries. Chiron is a 50-year cycle. I don't usually spend a lot of time on it here, nor am I going to tonight. Not because it's not important, I know that was a double negative, but because there's only so much we can cover in an hour. Chiron moved into Aries, and it turns retrograde on July 4th. And this is often about internalizing wounds. It's about healing. Chiron is a bit of a maverick. But I think that that's an important day. I don't want to say more about it because I want to go right to the next day or two, which are kind of pretty cool days from an astrological point of view. And one of them plugs into a larger rhythm that I talked about last month and that we will return to again, but are not going to dig in too deeply tonight. You can always go back and listen to or watch the June forecast on YouTube, where I talk about the Neptune-Jupiter trine, and here let's get rid of some of the noise here and leave the planets in and just kind of go back to aspected points. Let's go Neptune, Jupiter, and well, we can leave Venus in there. Guess we're going to need her in a minute, and that's good. Okay, so we have this very powerful thing that began last December, mid-December, and I talked a lot about this last month, that has to do with slow-moving Jupiter in Scorpio. Jupiter moved into Scorpio last fall. Jupiter stays in a sign for about a year. Jupiter and Scorpio corresponded pretty closely with the new awareness around the abuse of power, sexuality. I've spoken a lot about this in the months, over the months prior. Scorpio is intense passion. It's also power. It's magnetic. Scorpio is about transformation, and it's about evolution. Jupiter is about awareness. The whole year that Jupiter is in Scorpio, we're bringing things up from the dark. We're bringing things out of the darkness into the light. They're not always pretty, but at least in the light we get to work with them. When they were in the dark, they were untouchable, unseeable, and we couldn't do anything with them. So the actual Jupiter-Neptune trines were exact back the beginning of December 2017. They were exact again on May 25th, and they will be exact again on August 19th. Jupiter and Neptune have similar energies, but different. The similarity is that they're both expansive. In ancient astrology, Pisces was ruled by Jupiter, and Sagittarius was ruled by Jupiter. In modern astrology, Neptune has been given to Pisces, so there's some affinity between Jupiter and Neptune, but Jupiter can only expand up till Saturn. It's inside the orbit of Saturn. Neptune is dreams and illusions and fantasy and spirituality. Neptune has no bounds. It can expand forever. Jupiter can only expand up to the outward circumference of the real world, which is why Jupiter is learning and travel and philosophy. It's expansive, but only up to the point of what's real and what's not. So Jupiter and Neptune doing this dance of a trine all this year is opening up the door, the window, to our imagination, to what's possible. We can see the good that we might have. That doesn't mean we have it right now, but it's there. It makes us all into visionaries, if you will. And during July, what happens is that first, the sun, on July 5th through the 8th, I'm going to move this forward a day at a time now, we're talking about Jupiter, the planet of expansion, opportunity, the buoyant planet, harmonizing with Neptune, the planet of dreams, illusions, magic, fantasy, spirituality, and the sun radiating, pumping energy into this circuit. This is a really cool pattern, but we have to go out of our way to use it. And I would say, how would we use it? I would say that over the next week and a half or two, because this is already building energy right now, and in some ways can be used to take the heat off of the lightning of the Mars-Uranus square that doesn't go away just because we're not looking at it here. And so this is about meditating. This is about doing music, listening to music. This is about being in nature. This is about doing whatever one can do to heal oneself and to get away from the noise so that we can quiet ourselves so we can feel what's on the inside. I don't want to belabor this a whole lot. It's important, but we have a bunch to cover yet, and I want to make sure we get through it. So that's this period of time. By the way, in this same period of time, we also have Mercury coming in to move opposite Mars. Let me add back in the noise. Displayed points, where are we? There we go. And come back here. All right. So we can see here that Mercury, and Mars, this is actually exact on the 5th. So if we back this up to the 5th, Mercury would be exactly opposite Mars. But we have another piece here unfolding. That's the square between Jupiter and Mercury and Mars. So there's always patterns within patterns. But the point here is that we have this magic of this grand trine happening, but into it we get Mercury in Leo. Mercury, our thoughts, our communication, our words. Leo is say it out loud. It's be dramatic. It's say it with flowers. And in a way that Mercury in Leo is going to bump into Mars in Aquarius, and the difference here is what my needs and my desires are, Venus, versus what's good for the community. That would be the Mars in Aquarius, which is less individual and more communal. As we move on, that Mercury squares Jupiter on the 9th. Be careful about overdoing things. On the 9th also, we have Venus moving from Leo into Virgo. Venus liked being in Leo. She got to be flagrant and playful out front. And in Virgo, she has to be a little bit more proper. She has to be a little more contained. Venus in Virgo, I always think of as the list maker. It's the, what do I want in a relationship? This, not this, this. Oh, you're new. Let's see. This, check. This, no. This, no, you're not good. Next. There's that sense of Virgo being, doing the analytics, doing the details, and in Venus and Virgo, she can be hot, but she just has to have everything just right before. And I say she, not meaning that you have to be a woman to feel it. It's just the energy of Venus is a yin energy. On July 10th, Jupiter, which has been retrograde in Scorpio, turns direct. We'll begin to feel that weight of Jupiter moving forward until it moves out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius this fall. May not be a particular event right now, but Jupiter is certainly showing up with its weight. On July 11th, we have Venus having moved into Virgo, forming a trine with Uranus. Now, I'm not going to take out all the other colors here, but I am going to stop just for a moment here and do this. No, can't use red. I need to use some other color. Yellow will be fine. So Venus moving into Virgo, Earth sign, Uranus in Taurus, Earth sign, Saturn in Capricorn, Earth sign. Before we talked about the grand trine in water. Grand trines are self-sufficient. They're self-contained. The energy just hums. It feeds back into itself. The prior grand water trine of Jupiter, Neptune, and the Sun is about emotional self-sufficiency. This grand trine is about practical self-sufficiency. Why practical? Because it's in earth signs. It's a grand earth trine. Now, it's not uncommon to have what I call a traveling grand trine, meaning that the moving planets are making that grand trine for an hour or two or a day or two or so, but it's unusual to have two in such close proximity. And this, in a way, is the good news of August, that we get this practicality from Venus, what we desire, connecting up first with a trine to Uranus, which basically says, you know what? I want something completely different. Uranus, other than normal. I want something new. I want to think about, or I want to be with some idea that I've never thought of before, something out of the box. I want to be with a person who's different from anyone I've ever been with before. I don't just mean romantically, it's just in any way. But the interesting thing is that Venus forms that trine to Uranus on the 11th, and then she forms a trine on the 13th to Saturn. So she goes from a trine to Uranus, where anything goes, to a trine to Saturn, where I wouldn't say nothing goes, but Venus trine Saturn is really interesting, because Venus, when she's hooking up or connecting energetically with Saturn, basically says, I'm less interested in getting my needs met now than I am getting them met in a way that will be real and that will work and that will last. Venus-Saturn together is about loyalty. It's about integrity. Venus-Uranus is about neither of those. It's about yes in the moment if it feels good, you know. But what's interesting is that this begs the other, question. It's the remnants of what was an exact trine between Saturn and Uranus. And although that trine, because Saturn moves faster than Uranus, that trine is already waning, the fact that Venus coming through there kind of picks it back up. And again, that Venus first trining Uranus and then trining Saturn, in a way what it does is it says that balance between the unpredictable, crazy Uranian energy and the Saturnian make it real, make it last energy is really important. And again, one needs to be careful about infringing one's personal political beliefs on this, because this is just as much the Supreme Court making what I would consider horrendous rulings, 3 of them in one day. I mean, frightening. There are people who would say, no, these are really important and they're good. Sorry, I can't go there. But where I can go is, whichever way you think, that Saturn, which is tradition and stability and authority, coming up with something that's completely different. It's new, but it's old in a way. And so that's part of it. And this will build all through the month, or through the middle of the month also. On the 12th, we also have a very important piece of this, and that is, just back up here a couple of days, we're coming into the new moon, and the new moon here is incredibly important because Pluto is involved. Now granted, there's this grand trine cooking in the background, which really does take a lot of the pressure off, but the actual new moon itself is on the 12th at 7:47 p.m. and that would be, let's do this just an hour at a time. Whoops. That's close enough, right there. Okay, so here we have. So here we have. I'm going to say that one more time. So here we have the lineup of the sun and the moon and the earth, but this time the earth is not in the middle. It's the earth and then the moon and then the sun. And this time, because of the orbits, because you see the orbit of the earth going around the sun and the orbit of the moon going around the earth, where they intersect, that creates the north and south node of the moon. The north and south node of the moon are the places where the ripple of the earth around the sun and the ripple of the moon around the earth intersect. The north and south node right now, the north node is at 6 degrees of Leo, and the south node is in Aquarius, opposite it. What's significant is that when there is a new moon close to the north or south node, that's a solar eclipse. When there's a full moon close to the north or south node, that's a full moon or lunar eclipse. So July 12th is the first of the 2 July eclipses. This one is a Cancer new moon solar eclipse. Even though the north node is in Leo, it's at the very beginning of Leo. And all eclipses are weird time loop transformations that somehow go backward and forward. Solar eclipses, basically, they're like someone grabbing the light switch of reality and turning it on and off, and it's almost like it induces a form of epilepsy. It's not really, but it's like time becomes different, and things that were important in the past may become important in the future. Its polarities become apparent, things change. In the ancient traditions, and I said this last year around the Great American Solar Eclipse, the tradition is solar eclipse, the king must die. Now, obviously, it didn't work last summer. Might it work this summer? Well, here's the interesting thing. Well, look, I don't want to diverge into politics too much, but the problem is that for those people who are offended by everything that the current president does, and I'm getting that some of you are not, it's okay. But for those of you who are offended by everything the president does, him being impeached or thrown out of office isn't necessarily going to change anything. I mean, that's the piece behind all of that stuff of get rid of them, get rid of them. We still have basically the same governmental structure, and instead of having one person in there, we have another person who maybe is more methodical and even more scary in his beliefs. Again, that's from my perception. I'm not infringing that upon you. However, the fact of the matter is that this new moon eclipse, this solar eclipse, is partile. Do people know the word partile? Astrology, something is partile if it's in the same number degree. So here we have the sun and the moon both in the 20th degree of Cancer, and we have Pluto in the 20th degree of Capricorn. That's an opposition. It's a partile opposition. What this means is that this eclipse has Pluto, the lord of the underworld, the lord of transformation, evolution, death, regeneration. Pluto, who basically, it's nihilism in the pure Nietzschean sense of that which gets to the top of the mountain and becomes the most important, has to deconstruct and go to the bottom so it can be reconstructed and brought upward again. Whenever the sun conjuncts and opposes Pluto, twice a year like the sun conjuncting and opposing Saturn, that's always important. But when there's an eclipse nailed to it, this is incredibly powerful. And what makes it more interesting is the fact that there's this grand trine behind it, which in some ways takes some of the stress and tension and stabilizes it and says, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, something positive can happen from this energy without it just being destructive. So that's the new moon eclipse on July 12th. Moving right along, we then have Venus forming a trine with Saturn on the 13th. That's really part of that. That's the part of that grand trine I was talking about. Then on the 22nd, let's bump this head a couple of, oh, we're doing this by hours. Then on the 22nd, there we go, the sun moves from Cancer into Leo. Leo is a fixed sign. It's the midsummer. Right now we're in Cancer, the beginning, the cardinal, the opening of summer, so to speak. When the sun reaches Cancer, we looked at this earlier, this is the beginning of that T-square that over the first days of Leo, the sun will first square Uranus and then oppose Saturn. Again, we have a bit of dynamic energy here. What's interesting is that these are not outer planet. They're not like Jupiter to Saturn or Saturn to Pluto. They're inner planets with connections to the outer ones. And these are very powerful, very, very dynamic, very changeful. I would be hard-pressed to guess what this will be, but I'm guessing that this will be a few days of, I can't believe this happened after that happened yesterday. You know, there'll be a news cycle here. We've been in that for a couple of years now. So that takes us up. The sun moves into Leo. Remember, in Cancer, the energy is withdrawn. It's inside. It's caring. It's nurturing. We're tending our gardens. We're doing the little things and making everything right. In Leo, it's flagrant. It's out there. Things are ripened. The flowers are going, hey, I'm here. Look at me. You know, love me. You know, Leo, in its insecurity, is sad because it needs love from everyone. Leo, when it's secure, is amazing in its magnanimity to give love to everyone. So Leo is the summer sun. It's relentless. It shows up every day. Well, maybe not here in Seattle. Well, even here in Seattle. On the 24th, Venus opposes Neptune, so we have a little bit of a couple of fantasy days here with that Venus coming into the opposition, Venus coming into the opposition to Neptune, Venus here in Virgo, coming into an opposition to Neptune in Pisces. We move onward. We're going to jump to the 25th, which we looked at a little bit before. And that is the other side of this grand T-square, because now we have the sun coming into the opposition to Mars, which is on the 26th, and the sun had just squared Uranus on the 25th, and the actual Mars square Uranus is on August 1st. So again, real dynamic, real crazy change. That's not just out there in the world, but it's also in our personal lives, because remember, the without and the within are one and the same. And this leads us up to the full moon on July 27th. It ran away from me. There we go. July 27th at 1:20 p.m. July 27th, and let's just do this an hour at a time, and that's close enough. And here we have, let's go to this screen, and here we have the moon at 4 degrees of Aquarius and the sun at 4 degrees of Leo. This is and again, notice how close the sun is and the moon is to the north and south nodes. So this is the second eclipse. Eclipses almost always happen in pairs. Occasionally there's a third one. But this eclipse occurs with the sun conjuncting the north node, and the moon that's being eclipsed is conjunct the south node. And this eclipse, it has another saving grace, but oddly enough, one would think that if an eclipse had Pluto involved in it, it would be worse than an eclipse that had Mars involved in it. And yet, I think that this one is tougher because the moon is conjunct Mars, conjunct the south node. Now the south node, if we put value judgments on the nodes, the north node's good, the south node's bad. I'm not sure it's that simple. Matter of fact, I'm sure it's not that simple. But the south node is kind of the patterns we have from the past. It's where we go where we're comfortable. It's where we're adept. Under pressure, we go back to our south node because we can do that, whether it was from our childhood or our parents or our genetics or our past life or who the hell knows. But what we have here is the moon conjunct Mars conjunct the south node coming in not only to the full moon, but squaring Uranus. And this is like, again, there's this feeling of talking tough, of aggression, of anger, of sudden change that may or may not be good because it's based upon, or it's likely to be based upon, a repressed something from the past or something happening now. Remember, Mars is still retrograde. Oh, I didn't say that before. This is a full moon eclipse conjunct the south node, conjunct retrograde Mars. These are not, again, it's not bad. It's just they're not easy to work with. And often, these things are easier to work with in our individual lives, even if they're not easy to work with, compared to how easy or hard they are to work with on a social, governmental, political level. So we may see some problems here toward the end of the month. And again, I don't even think you have to be an astrologer to just assume that stuff is on the way. But there is a saving grace here too, and that is that Venus is forming a trine with Pluto. This gives us a deep well of power, emotional power to go to tap while we're moving through these transformations. And we still have the Saturn-Pluto, which is left over from that grand trine. Venus has moved on away from it, but it's still there. So this eclipse, I think the two eclipses are both very powerful, and both of them have an aspect to them that is very difficult. The solar eclipse being opposite Pluto, and the lunar eclipse being conjunct Mars. And so both of them have a toughness to them, but they also both have trines to alleviate the energy. And what that really means is that it's incumbent upon us, upon each and every one of us, to practice in whatever way we can those things that allow us to take difficult energy and to transform it. I sometimes think that we all have within us a cyclotron that transforms radioactivity into, lead. And we can either engage it like a chimera, the hissing she-goat. Am I saying that right? Chimera. Chimera. C-H-I-M-E-R-A. We can engage those out of balance energies on the outside and feed into them, or we can go in and process our own stuff on the inside. I mean, I hate to be trite, but it's, let there be peace and let it begin with me. There's that sense that during this month, we may need that more than ever. Look, crazy shit is going on, and it may continue to go on. But there will be an August, and there will be a September, and there will be a 2023, and there will be we need to figure out on two levels. What can we do day to day that has to do with interactions on the outer world that can help alleviate some of the stresses that are occurring from, concentration camp like crazy shit where kids are being pulled from their parents. Again, I don't care what your political beliefs are, but there's stuff going out there that's horrific. What can we do that can either contribute time, money, effort, energy, or just common sense to helping things like that? And at the same time, what can we do to make ourselves be sane enough to hold a position in this crazy world? Because the two are at one and they are separate. And I remember Ram Dass once telling a story of an advisor to the king, maybe it was me, an astrologer, in some ancient times going to the king and saying, King, I have some really bad news and I have some good news. And the king goes, all right, what is it? He goes, well, the bad news is that this year's entire crop is tainted with a fungus, an ergot, like LSD. And when you eat it, it won't poison you, but it makes you go crazy. He goes, okay, that sounds horrible, but he goes, well, but no one's going to die. They're just going to go crazy. And when the year is over, everybody will be normal again. He goes, well, what's the good news? He goes, well, the good news is I've scoured all the current stores and I found enough grain for you and me so that during the year that we can be sane enough that we can manage the entire year and we can hold it together. And the king says, trusted advisor, thank you very much. You've done a great job. Here's what I command. I command you destroy the good grain, because you and I shall paint big red dots on each other's foreheads, so that every time we get together and we see each other, we'll remember that the red dots are there to remind us that we've gone crazy with everyone else, but that it's temporary. Because if we ate only the good grain and we were the only sane people in this crazy world, we would go crazy. But if we go crazy with everyone, we'll come back with everyone. So we just need a way to remember where we are. Welcome to July. Thank you.